we have a return of the social influencer? And you'll just have to stay tuned to figure that out.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Somebody's going to make Sherman Jones famous. Sherman, me, I'm not sure which, but he's got some really important points of view, and he reminds me of that every time I see him at the local auto dealership, where he professionally markets and comforts customers with their vehicles like no other. That's not our concern tonight. Our concern is what he has to say. And every time I'm at the dealership, when I walk by, he's got plenty to say. So we bring him on every once in a while. He wants his own show. Well, you'll decide whether or not he needs one. Coming up this evening. How are you? Hey, listen, it's Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation tonight, so don't go anywhere. Let's go to the rundown and check on what's happening, though, in the world. So Donald Trump met with the New York Times yesterday, and it's getting all sorts of attention, headlines galore all over the place. Moderates views. Yeah, a lot of moderation of views, actually. More headlines, a little bit of a thumping on the media, which is something Donald Trump thinks he can do and will do perpetually. And then it's always funny when an alternative media to the New York Times reflects on the meeting with the New York Times. Here's the latest from CBS.
The failing New York Times, and it is failing.
Despite what he called the newspaper, Mr. Trump was all smiles after a closed-door meeting with the New York Times, where reporters live tweeted nearly every minute, exposing significant shifts in policy.
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.
Including his long-standing promise to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Hillary Clinton's use of private email servers as Secretary of State.
That would be a very good first step. That's a good first step.
One reporter tweeted that Mr. Trump said, "I don't want to hurt the Clintons. I really don't. She went through a lot and suffered greatly in many different ways." Later he added, "I think it would be very, very divisive for the country."
A lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax.
He also seemed to change his tune on climate change from a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese to a phenomenon linked to human activity. Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is the former head of the conservative website Breitbart, who in an interview with Mother Jones magazine last summer said, "We're the platform for the alt-right, a conservative movement popular with white nationalists." Asked about the alt-right Tuesday, Mr. Trump told the Times, "I don't want to energize the group, and I disavow the group."
I would bring back waterboarding, and I'd bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding.
That was Trump on torture, but yesterday he told the Times he was surprised that General James Mattis, the candidate he is seriously considering for defense secretary, didn't favor it, leaving the door open for a change. Mattis is one of a number of leading cabinet contenders. The list includes former campaign foe Mitt Romney, who's up for Secretary of State, and Ben Carson is being considered for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, even telling Fox he's been offered the job.
That was one of the offers that's on the table.
Okay, now, again, Hillary Clinton, no prosecution. Waterboarding, forget it. Climate change, maybe it's something to consider. First 100-day video, which we talked about last night, no Obamacare discussion, no wall. I don't know, is this the candidate that so many of you voted for? Stay tuned. This is becoming, I don't even know what it's becoming. What's it becoming? Well, it's just, Sherman will tell me what it's becoming. In the meantime, the idea of a UN ambassador seems to be, at least in terms of diversity, we've got a little bit of progress there. Nikki Haley has been chosen. Here's what CBS reported on that.
And so having said that,
South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley says she is accepting President-elect Donald Trump's offer to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations out of a sense of duty. Mr. Trump is in Florida for Thanksgiving. In a statement this morning, the president-elect praised the daughter of Indian immigrants, saying she has a proven track record of bringing people together. During the Republican primaries, Haley was a Trump critic who endorsed Marco Rubio, and Mr. Trump tweeted months ago, "The people of South Carolina are embarrassed by Nikki Haley."
Education Commissioner appointment today as well, a charter school advocate. Interesting. To the investigation being over here in Rhode Island, Nick Mattiello and Steve Frias still trying to figure out who actually won Now, amidst the near certification of the ballot after the recount and a lost envelope in Cranston and all that kind of thing, the state police reported out today that their investigation is complete. There is no fraud charge coming against anybody. Steve Frias and the guy laughing on the left there, Brandon Bell, the GOP chairman, were hoping for some kind of progress on, fraudulent doings when it comes to mail ballots. It's not going to happen. But we do have a headline here from WPRI.com, I believe, that tells us from Ted Nisi's work that inside the story that Brandon Bell says, despite the state police saying there's no investigation, this thing's not over. All right. I don't know what's left, but we shall see. And then this made the news. In fact, the front page. We are kind of fascinated by the idea of a Christmas tree. I guess it's all Link Chafee's fault, right, when he wouldn't call it one. I have no idea why this is news. They brought in a tree that they said was too small. And so they took the tree out and they put it somewhere else and they brought another tree in. Okay?
Front page.
That's it. Front page. I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe Sherman knows. Headline, one of many here that we'll discuss. Donald Trump is disavowing the alt-right. There are a lot of people out there that are very concerned that the alt-right is a racist group, that there are all sorts of bigoted undertones, that Steve Bannon, his new senior advisor, who runs Breitbart and has business with the alt-right, right, is a problem. I don't know. Sherm, welcome. Happy holidays.
How are you? Happy holidays, Dan.
Got a problem with Steve Bannon's appointment?
Well, it's like I am a direct descendant of my father, and I do what my father did. My father worked at Tufts University 38 years and was a nice guy to the neighbors, so I'm working hard the rest of my life, and I'm nice to my neighbors. You've got a group of people here that have been put in a position that they think they're in power. When Donald Trump became elected, no problem with that. But there are certain groups that think now they're going to separate whites, separate blacks, Latinos, and Chinese people just so they can stir up their own stuff and have police declare martial law on different groups, and kids in school are protesting. And the reason why they're doing this is because you have some people that were silently against human beings. It's not a black and white thing here. This is a human thing. When I say it's a human thing, it's a love and a hate thing. You're either a loving person or a hating person. There's been people that's been quietly hating for a long time, saying, oh, well, I like white people, but behind closed doors they don't. Or I like black people, but behind closed doors they don't. Now, these white supremacy groups, they thought that when Donald Trump came in, that he was going to be, yeah, I'm all for white supremacy. But when he was elected, what he realizes, Donald is really not going to run anything. So now these people are left to run wild. People are going to run wild. They're going to hire more cops. They're going to get more military weapons for urban areas. It's going to be a drive of, let's shut these people up. These white supremacy people have been here a while. It's not like they just came up. I mean, they've been very, very quiet. You've got now people are walking around in schools. You got kids walking around in school, build a wall. I even know someone that when he went to his job and Donald was elected, one of the guys came to him and says, yes, we've got a white guy in the White House again. And what people don't realize is the more we feed this monster, the bigger it's going to get, and nobody's going to grow from it. Nobody's going to grow. People are going to get hurt. People are going to go to jail. But this white supremacy group, they need to be shut down. And Mr. Trump is going to...
Well, we're not talking about one white supremacy
well,
group.
We're not
we're
going to say
talking about
one.
People who call themselves white nationalists. And I mean, that's a lot. I know. Well, listen, whenever I invite Sherman, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm really trying to follow your track.
Well, where I'm going, you were talking about...
I don't follow your track.
My track is, this thing is huge.
You're not suggesting that, are you suggesting that Donald Trump actually is inspired by these people? In any
Not
way?
at all. What I'm saying is he has nothing to do with them.
Got it.
But the media is going to make it seem that he does.
Got it.
I mean, because...
All right, I follow that, and so...
And so in order for us to show that this is not true, we have to be respectable and loving to one another. We can't allow politicians to make us think that we need to be against one another. See, because the bottom line is, who's most important to me is my mayor and my governor, because they're going to affect me immediately. The president is going to, he's going to affect, but you know, I must say, the president, I've never met him. I've met my mayor, I've met my governor.
Who'd you vote for?
I voted for Sherman Jones for president. That's who I voted for. And the reason I voted for Sherman is because I think I can do a better job than them. And the reason I think that is because I will come to the streets, the local streets, and I will talk to the people as the president. I'm not going to sit back and say there's a...
You voted for yourself, and now you're trying to, and now you've got a reason for it? You voted for yourself, it's a protest vote.
No, it's not a protest vote. I actually think I'm qualified to be the president of these United States. Now, you can laugh at that now. Donald Trump said it. Donald Trump said it, and they laughed at him. They laughed at Donald. Nobody believed Donald Trump was going to make it, and that's how he made it. Is because he offended everybody because he talked like the regular people.
Are you planning for 2022 or 2020?
No comment.
All right.
But what I will say before you go.
No, hold it. Everyone wants to hear it.
Okay.
The concept of social influencer, we'll revisit that as well so you understand the basis of this conversation. In the meantime, let me just remind you, if you're thinking about a renovation of your kitchen or your bath, Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center would be a great choice. I know what they did for me. They reconstructed the house almost from the kitchen out, and I will tell you, it was on budget and on time, and the work is licensed and insured, and I'm a happy camper. You will be too. Talk to them about a new kitchen or bath for the new year. Stay with us.
It is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together, work together to deal with the many challenges that we face. We want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds. Please.
Well, thank you very much, President Obama. This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other. I have great respect. The meeting lasted for almost an hour and a half, and it could have, as far as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. We really, we discussed a lot of different situations, some wonderful and some difficulties.
Well, listen, since Sherman announced that he voted for himself for the presidency and is being cute about 2020, I figure I just give you a little bit of succession. President Obama, President-elect Trump, and Sherman.
Yes.
Who might be the next?
Who knows?
Come on, man.
Well,
tell everybody what social influencer means, since it's under your thing here.
What that means is I basically want to influence people on being more positive than negative. And this is all people, because that's all we are. We can sit back and try to market ourselves as white people, black people, Chinese people, but we're all human beings. It's the have and the have-nots. Either you're part of the 1% or you're not. However, when it comes to issues in social atmospheres...
So only the 1% have, is what you're telling me?
Pardon?
Only the 1% have?
Yes. Only the 1% have.
Only the 1% have.
When I say
so
have,
you bought into that whole
No.
routine.
Don't get me twisted. When I say 1% have, I'm talking about those people that are financially set for the rest of their lives, the Bilderbergs.
Gotcha.
You know, those type of people.
All right.
I'm not
so set for the rest of your life is the definition of have.
Absolutely,
okay.
Financially.
Gotcha.
But when you talk about the regular people that are out here, we go to work every day. We pay our bills every day, and we need to, when we see each other inside the grocery market, we need to be able to say hello. We don't need to be walking around all tensed up thinking, oh, one person's different because they're the shade of their skin. When we go to work, I mean, when I went to work, I seen some things I couldn't believe. So, and in schools, I've seen some things that I couldn't believe. However, I've been blessed enough to be in an atmosphere at my employment where everyone is loving to everyone, and that's from the janitor to the owner. And these are the important things that need to be displayed within us as humanity. Excuse me. This is what needs to be exposed to each and every one of us from each other. We need to show some humanity, some care, some love, like it used to be in the olden days.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful message.
I mean, realistically, we need to, because if we don't, we're doomed. We'll be in the same circle, chasing our tail, saying, oh, I want this one for president or that one for president. But once a person...
You just jump to a place I don't get. I mean, I get the, love each other, be easy on each other, take care of each other, respect each other. I get that part.
Okay.
I don't know where you jumped to the presidency.
The reason why I jumped because...
And I still don't know about this notion that writing yourself in is a legitimate exercise.
At 56 years old, I have never seen an election like this in my entire life.
Nobody has.
I've never seen people in such an uproar. I've never seen so many people not want to vote. And so...
Got it.
The point that I'm trying to make is, if we can communicate with one another on a more positive note and help one another and build instead of destroy.
Why do you think we got here? Because I think you're correct in your analysis of the current tone. How did we get here from where?
We got here because we actually thought that when we voted someone in, that they was going to really look at our issues and do something about it. And they don't do anything about our issues.
So Barack Obama failed us?
Yes, Barack Obama failed us in one way. And one way is, I don't think that he should have ever said anything about local issues that happen with police officers. I think he should have sit back and let each state deal with fixing the problem. And
too much meddling?
It's not too much meddling. It's too much. He was involved locally with too many things.
Many of those things are obviously racially tension. The things he got involved in, for the most part, were white police officers, black victims.
Well, he had...
I'm not defending, I'm just saying, I'm reminding everybody what most of his local intervention was about.
And it's about that. Well, then if it's about that, then it really has to stop. It can't be...
What has to stop?
It has whatever the issue is. If the issue is that severe where the president has to talk about local issues, I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but you probably are, in Chicago, what about the black people that are killing the black people? Can the president speak about that? I would like him to not just speak about the police shooting black people. I want that to happen. But I also want these young black people to stop killing one another, because it's not fair to say, it's okay, I'm going to be quiet that 300 people got killed in the last 2 months in Chicago, but, I want to focus over here where this one person was killed by a white police officer. Let's do something about people killing people. If a police officer kills a person, he should not be suspended with pay. He should be arrested and put in jail. If a black person kills another black person in Chicago or Boston or New York, they should go to jail. That's what should happen. This, let's see which is going to be the most severe crime for us to investigate as the president. Let me see, I'm going to step in this. Why? If you're not going to step in it wholeheartedly, totally don't. Because there are more black people dying in Chicago, his hometown. What Obama did for me is he let me know I was an American. Because the morning I woke up after he was elected, I said, man, I could have been the president. There's no excuse for anybody to say why they can't be something. It's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of sacrifice, it's a lot of compassion, and it's a lot of love. You can't grow with hate, but you can grow with love, compassion, and acceptance.
In addition to a potential run for the presidency, let's find out what Sherm predicts will happen for 2017 when we come back. Stay with us. All right. Some of you may be wondering, how does Dan know this guy? Well, listen, I don't have to know a lot of people who come on the show, but I know Sherm from the local business, and since he was so ebullient about how much love is there, I'm happy to tell you he works at Elmwood Dodge Chrysler Jeep Ram on Taunton Avenue, East Providence. I've long been a customer and endorser of on the radio side. His views have nothing to do with the dealership whatsoever at all, but in addition to buying a car, you may end up in a social conversation with Sherm from time to time, correct?
Well, it's there's times, yes.
Every once in a while.
Every
you
once in a
don't
while.
force your views on
No,
people,
no,
but
no.
You are looking for an outlet, such as this one, to just get some things off your chest. So there gives you a little perspective. In the meantime, what's your prediction for the next year? What's your concern? What do you think might be a success?
Realistically, what's going to happen is Mr. Trump is going to realize what's really going on in the White House that he can't do anything about. And when he finds out what the Trilateral Commission is doing and all the big wigs that are above him, when he finds that out, it's going to blow his mind, and his hair's going, well, his hair's orange now, but it'll turn white just like Obama, just like Bill Clinton.
Which big wigs above him?
Well, the Bilderbergs. I say them because they're a very large family, and they're very wealthy. The Trilateral Commission. You have people that make decisions because of financing. See, Donald Trump won the election because he wanted to do it because it was a challenge. He didn't want what's getting ready to come down the line to work. So this is what I predict.
In between, I got to tell you, in between what I think has been a lot of beating around a bush here,
I predict
you have made a couple of very salient points.
Okay.
And I actually concur with you. I think Donald Trump won the election and went, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Now, does he transition into a whole different person and/or effective person? I hope so, for the sake of the country.
Well, he was always
half his issues have already been thrown in the dumpster.
Well, he was. You have to understand something. He was an entertainer. He was entertaining. His whole campaign was about entertaining.
And when you run for president, how is anybody going to distinguish between you and Donald Trump? Because you are entertaining.
Well,
you only got a minute, so go.
Okay, the reality is this. I predict Donald Trump will be impeached. And the reason why I'm saying he's going to be impeached, you're laughing now. But
I'm not laughing. I voted it myself. Year one?
I'd say the second year. He'll be impeached.
Over what?
I can't say the issue because I don't know, but from his walk, he can only take so much. He's a regular guy, man. He's a regular guy with money. But he wants to hang out with boys and hang out with girls. And if you're the president, you can't do that. If you're the president, he wants to change the whole Secret Service because Secret Service says, you can't do this. Who are you talking about? I'm Donald Trump. You can't tell me what to do. He didn't run for president to run the country. He ran for the president to show that he could win because he wants to be a winner. Some people, they really get off on winning. That's what that was about. You're going to see, and America's going to see, and then they're going to say, well, wait a minute.
How about Sherman Jones?
Might as well. Might as well.
Wait a minute. There's Sherman Jones. All right, look. Happy Thanksgiving. Come back.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
As long as you're on time for the show, you're always welcome.
Well, yeah.
That's another story. Sherman Jones in 2020 or 2024 or maybe 2028.
Well,
I got to explain to him it takes a while to get a campaign going. You know that, brother? It does.
Yeah, it does.
One vote ain't going to get it done.
Don't challenge me.
We'll be right back.
I like to win, too.
Final words. Stay with us. Cut through some of the messy stuff there with Sherman. He makes a few interesting points, including that prediction, which I'm not necessarily going to support specifically. But, hey, listen. A lot of different voices here. If you want to get on board and become one, you just let us know here at Dan York State of Mind. We'd be happy to have you. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving with your family. Some previous shows, both Thursday and Friday, and back at you Monday with an original. Thanks.